Ros-Lehtinen, our Chairman Emeritus.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, ambassadors. I continue to be extremely frustrated by the administration's inability to implement or even articulate a strategy in Syria or in the Middle East as a whole. Despite the public facade, it does not appear that the president really wants Assad removed from power, or that we have any understanding of the long-term tragic impact that Assad's policies are having on the Syrian people, on the region, our allies, on our national security, or else we know it and don't wish to do anything about it. Do we really need additional evidence to prove that the current chaos is not working? The president seems to be running out the clock until it's someone else's problem, and I don't think history will look kindly on the choices that this administration has made on the Syria issue. Some questions for you, and I would like to get yes and no answers if I could. Do you believe that ISIL and Assad are separate issues?
No, at this point, Ms. And they're linked.
And do you agree that Assad's atrocities against his own people are a recruiting tool for ISIL?
Absolutely.
Is it possible to defeat ISIL while Assad's massacres continue with Iran and Russia's help?
No, the two issues are linked.
Is it possible to negotiate a solution with the opposition while they continue?
Possibly.
Are we pressuring Iran and Russia to stop Assad's massacre?
Absolutely, on a daily basis.
Should we infer that the president agrees more with Russia and Iran's goal of keeping Assad in power than he would have us believe?
Certainly not. The presidents and certainly the secretary have said many times that Assad's departure is absolutely critical to any future in Syria.
What has the president and the White House, through the Secretary of State, communicated to you about the administration's desired and end state and national security objectives in Syria? And is it possible to achieve those goals when Russia and Iran's goals are the complete opposite?
The Secretary, of course, we have different goals in Syria, but I think the Secretary's goal is to find sufficient common ground through a process of negotiation and a political settlement that we might be able to find a way through this. He's not naive about this. This is what the whole Vienna process and follow-up process is about.
And when you say common ground and a political settlement, does that entail keeping Assad in power?
No. Absolutely not, but it might entail some negotiation on a timetable for his.
And we would be working with who to try to achieve that settlement, to have him go somewhere else?
We're working with in the Vienna process or 20 different countries. Obviously, our Gulf allies and the Turks are intimate. Our Turks are intimately involved with this, as are some of our European allies. And we're constantly in touch with the UN and members of the moderate opposition and armed opposition within Syria and those civilian leaders in exile.
And if those allies, do they see Assad's removal from power as imperative to deal with this situation?
Certainly our European allies, our Gulf allies and Turkey do see that. They're absolutely determined that he will not remain in power.
And to follow up on Ms. Frankel's questions, there's a lot of talk in different communities that we represent about whether the United States is doing enough to protect Syrian civilians from the Assad regime. Is that still one of the priorities of this administration, and how is that priority manifested?
Certainly, we try. We've provided over $2.5 billion for humanitarian assistance inside Syria. So we're certainly trying to feed and support Syrian populations who are under great stress. And we've certainly, as you mentioned, raised before, we have certainly talked with the Russians about preventing Assad from attacking his own people.
And the bombs that we have seen that have been attacking some of the forces with whom we are dealing and with we are protecting and we are arming, and yet some of those seem to be targeting the very folks who are supposed to be the good guys in this battle. What are we doing to make sure that that ends?
That's absolutely true, Congresswoman. We mentioned, I think, that 85 to 90% of the strikes were against anti-regime forces. And on your second question, we can talk more about that in a classified setting.
And just one last question. I know I'm out of time. There's been a lot of discussion in the open press about like-minded factors like the Nusra Front being part of this coalition that will then defeat another band of bad guys. Are we in that coalition building with folks who we would normally see as our enemies and the enemies of our values?
Nusra Front is an al-Qaeda affiliate. It is possible that some members of the opposition have been forced to adhere to join al-Nusra because they had nowhere else to go. But al-Nusra Front and its leadership are terrorist groups.
And we will remain with that thinking and not help those groups with their alliances with other.
No, we have designated Nusra.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Eliana.